Shabbos, Daf Ches through Kuf Daled. On Daf Ches, the Gemara brings a statement that if someone carries 4 amos in a Rishus Harabim that is Makura, that's roofed, has a roof over it, Pater, that's not considered carrying in a Rishus Harabim. Fishe'ena dom l'diglei midbar, because the Rishus Harabim with a roof does not resemble the encampment of the Jews in the desert. That was not roofed, and therefore a roofed Rishus Harabim is not a Rishus Harabim. That's how we paskin. One of the key conditions of Rishus Harabim is that it not have a roof. If it has a roof, it's not a Rishus Harabim, it is rather a Carmelis. The Achronim raised various questions about exactly how to understand this criterion. In the Sefer Toldo Shmuel, he has 3 questions. He says, first of all, he says, what's the halacha of a Rishus Harabim that normally is unroofed, but it has a rain awning? For inclement weather, they roll out some kind of covering, and it's normally left open, but when the weather's bad, they cover it with some kind of roof. So he says, do you say that it's a Rishus Harabim because this thing is only temporary? Or do you say, no, since it's not like the Diglei Midbar, the Diglei Midbar were never roofed, then it's not a Rishus Harabim. His conclusion, his maskana, he says, Ulai, he suggests that at least while it's open, it would be a Rishus Harabim. He seems to be implying that his maskana is to split the difference, that while it's closed, maybe it's not a Rishus Harabim, but at least while it is open, which is most of the time, the general case, it's a Rishus Harabim, because then it is like the Diglei Midbar. That's Kain Nerali, he says, B'tzarachin. Then he raises a second question, which he says is Pashut. He says the second issue he raises is that if you have stores that have awnings, that we still have them today, that extend out over the sidewalk into the street, that cover part of the street. So he says that does not take away the status of Rishus Harabim from the space under those awnings, because it's only a small part of Rishus Harabim. The street itself is mostly unroofed. The fact that there's an awning over a small part doesn't change the din. It remains a Rishus Harabim. Third thing he discusses is that even if the roof is very high, this he also thinks is pashut, even if the roof is very high, the eye can barely see it, it's so high up, but since it is roofed, it would not be a Rishus Harabim. The middle question, which he says was pashut, that if it's only a small portion of the Rishus Harabim that is roofed, that doesn't take away the status of Rishus Harabim from that place, since most of the street is not roofed. That actually is a subject of some debate among the poskim. The Magen Avram talks about a case of a wagon, where the wagon, he says, if the wagon is roofed, then the space under the wagon would not be Rishus Harabim because it's not like the Diglei Midbar, because the wagon is roofed. That seems to imply that even though it's only a small part of the Rishus Harabim, most of the Rishus Harabim is not roofed, but the roof over the wagon takes away the status of Rishus Harabim from that one spot. Also, even though it's only temporary, while the wagon travels, it's roofed. As soon as the wagon moves on, it will not be roofed. Nevertheless, the Magen Avram still seems to fail that at least at that point, that takes away the status of Rishus Harabim from that spot. But the B'tzel Chachma brings that the Yeshuas Malchai is matmi on this. He says, since it's only temporary, it's only for an hour or two, it's not Mistavra should lose its status of Rishus Harabim. B'tzel Chachma also talks about the other issue that he brings, that some of the poskim are mashma, that if it's only a small part of the Rishus Harabim, it doesn't lose the status of Rishus Harabim. So those 2 points are subject to dispute. On Daf Tes, the Gemara brings another condition of Rishus Harabim. The Gemara says that Kaimalan, we know that a Rishus Harabim has a minimum width of 16 amos. If it's less than 16 amos wide, it's not a Rishus Harabim. Again, the source is from the Mishkan. The Gemara makes a calculation, the width of the wagons and the Levium who are operating them, how you get to 16. But the Gemara says that the rule of Rishus Harabim, derived from Mishkan, is that it has to have a minimum width of 16 amos. There are some poskim who have tried to argue that modern streets in New York, would not have a din of Rishus Harabim, because they suggest you don't count the space where the cars drive. It's dangerous to walk there. It's against the law to jaywalk. And if you don't count the people themselves to be part of the Rabbim, the people in the cars to be part of the Rabbim, then the vehicular part of the street would not be a Rishus Harabim. The sidewalks would be okay, but the sidewalks themselves are not that wide, and the 2 sidewalks are separated by the cars, and they're separated by the parked cars. So the Klosenberger and Divrei Yatziv and Menashe Klein had tried to argue that modern streets would not be considered Rishus Harabim because they don't meet this condition of being 16 amos wide, of being 16 amos accessible to pedestrian traffic. On Daf Kuf, the Gemara tells us that Tel HaMislakit Asara Mitoch Arba, if you have a slope, and the slope is steep enough that the horizontal within a horizontal space of 4 amos, there's an elevation gain of 10 tfachim. That is enough to make the top of that little hill. If you have a hill whose sides are that steep, the sides of the hill are considered walls if they're steep enough that they go up 10 tfachim per 4 amos. And if someone carries from Rosh Hashanah to the top of that hill, someone throws something from Rosh Hashanah to the top of that hill, he'd be chayav from going from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. This idea of tel mislaked is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, and this is a major tool in the toolbox of modern Erev constructors to rely on tel mislaked. If we have hills, if we have steep slopes, as long as they're steep enough to qualify as tel mislaked, they're considered mechitzas, just like a wall or a Tzuras HaPesach is considered a mechitza. A steep enough hill is considered a mechitza, and this can save us a lot of work having to construct fences along those sides if we have hills or cliffs or various types of steep slopes that satisfy the rule of tel mislaked. Exactly how steep is this? So first of all, there's a machlokes among the early Achronim, going back to the 16th century. When we say 4 amos, is that 4 amos along 4 amos strictly horizontally along the base of along the ground, or is it 4 amos along the slope itself? If there's 4 amos at a line perpendicular to the vertical, that means that the hypotenuse of that triangle, if you have a triangle which is 10 tfachim tall and 4 amos along the base, then the hypotenuse will be more than 4 amos. So do you need the 10 tfachim to be within? Is there enough if the 10 tfachim rise within a triangle that on the bottom is 4 amos, even though the hypotenuse is more than 4 amos? Or do we have to have a steeper slope such that the hypotenuse has to be less than 4 amos and the 10 tfachim elevation has to be within that space? That's a slightly steeper slope. The two shiurim work out to be either 22.4 degrees or 24.6 degrees. But I'll call upon them if the slope is at least 24.6 degrees, then that slope is considered a wall and can be kosher for part of an eruv. The poskim have various further questions. First of all, some poskim suggest stairs. How do we treat stairs? If you have stairs, it's a series of vertical and then horizontal steps. It's not a slope. Do we look at that as a slope, or do we look at that as a series of vertical and horizontal things? In the Daf Shabbos, Rabbi Yaakov Bloy in the Daf Shabbos says that if the stairs are less than 3 tfachim high each, about 10 inches or so, and less than 3 tfachim and less than 3 tfachim across, that's always 3 tfachim is always the share. The less than that, we say love it. It's like it doesn't count. Then we look at it like one slope, and then we evaluate the whole thing based on the rules of tel mislaked. However, he says if the individual stairs, he says in general, if you have a slope and the slope is interrupted by a plateau, if it rises at this 25 degree angle for 5 tfachim, and then it flattens out in a plateau, and then it rises again. So it would depend. The poskim say how wide that break is. If that break is less than 3 tfachim, again, Rabbi says, then yesh omrim that you look at it as one long slope with a small flat interruption between. If it's more than 3 tfachim, then that's a more complex question. And in general, the poskim warn you that if you're making an eruv and you're relying on using slopes that are tel mislaked, they're steep enough. As natural phenomena, they're not going to be perfectly uniform. They might be steeper in some places and less steep in other places. You have to carefully check along the eruv to make sure that the slope remains steep enough throughout the entire expanse that you want to use as a wall of the eruv. If there are some points where the slope is less steep, that may be considered a pirza, a breach in the wall, and you'll have to figure out how wide is that breach and whether it causes a problem or not. On Daf Kavalov, the Gemara talks about gerachos. If you have walls that descend, don't reach all the way to the ground, so we often have a halachos Sinai called gerachos, that we extend the imaginary walls going all the way down. The Gemara broaches the question of whether in the context of Erevin we say that, whether making mechitzas on Shabbos, if we have a wall that doesn't reach the ground, if we can view it as extending all the way to the ground through the principle of gerachos. The Gemara says that we don't do that because such a mechitza is not valid for Shabbos, because it is a mechitza shegedim bokenbo. Little goats, little kids can run through that gap if it's more than 3 tfachim above the ground, and therefore such a mechitza is not a valid mechitza. Unless the mechitza goes within 3 tfachim of the ground, then either we say lavud, or we say the goats can't run through such a small gap. That's okay. So if you have a small gap at the bottom of a fence that's less than 3 tfachim, that's okay. If it's more than 3 tfachim, we don't say gerachos, we say it's mechitza shegedim bokenbo, and that's a problem. This is also something that comes up in modern Erevin. Let's say you have a chain link fence or some kind of fence that's valid for the wall of an eruv, but because of erosion or animals tunneling underneath, they eat away at the ground, and now the fence rises above the ground. Then if that gap above is more than 3 tefachim, that's a problem, and you have to consider it a pirza, and you have to either fix it or make sure that the pirza is small enough. There's a machlokes akronim also, how to understand this problem that if the gap is more than 3 tefachim, since gedim can run in and out, that's not a good mechitza. Some take the Gemara at face value and say the problem of the gedim is a problem per se. Since the goats can run in and out, that's what disqualifies this mechitza. As long as you can eliminate the problem of goats, it is a mechitza. So if you have, let's say, a mechitza that's 30 tefachim tall, but has a gap of 8 tefachim on the bottoms, that's plenty of room for gedim to run in and out. But you put up a small wall on the bottom of 3 tefachim high, now the gedim can't run because they run on the ground and the bottom 3 tefachim are blocked. So even though now you have 3 tefachim on the ground, another 5 tefachim of open space, and then another 22 tefachim up, the gedim don't, jump through the air and jump through the gap. That's called a mechitza she'ena gedim boken bo. And even though in the bottom 10 tefachim, 5 of them are open, that doesn't matter because the wall on the whole is a tall enough wall, and the bottom 3 tefachim are blocked, and that's good enough. The Chazon Ish disagreed. The Chazon Ish said no. Mechitza she'gedim boken bo doesn't just mean that actually gedim on the ground can break through. It means that it's a mechitza with gaps that are large enough for gedim. So the Chazon Ish would say that it doesn't work as long as there's a large gap in the mechitza within the bottom 10 tefachim. Above 10 tefachim doesn't matter, but as long as the bottom 10 tefachim has a large gap, it's a problem. If the gap is less than 3 tefachim, if you have 5 tefachim, 2 tefachim, and then 3 more tefachim, that's fine. Because if the gap is less than 3, it's only 2, then you say love it. But if the gap is 3 tefachim or more, even if the bottom 3 tefachim are blocked, that's still considered a problematic mechitza, and that's not good. Practical application, Rabbis Francis and Glenn are bringing their book, The Laws of an Eruv. Before they had coronavirus, people went to summer camps. So they had bungalows and summer homes. The floors were often raised above the ground on stilts or columns of some type. And there can be a large space of a good few tefachim between the ground itself and the floor of the house. If you want to use such a house, the wall of such a house as an eruv, you have a problem. You have to fill up that gap. According to the first group of poskim, as long as you fill up the bottom 3 tefachim, even if there's another couple of feet open before the house actually starts, that's fine because the bottom 3 tefachim are blocked off. According to the Chazon Ish, you can't do that. You can't have a large gap within the bottom 10 tefachim of the house. You can't have a gap of more than 3 tefachim, so you have to fix it and make the partition larger than 3 tefachim. Make sure it's within 3 tefachim of where the walls of the house actually start. The Gemara talks about a mechitza that was made on Shabbos. Mechitza that was made on Shabbos, the Gemara says, is a valid mechitza. It's a full-blown mechitza. But the Gemara concludes, after going back and forth, that if it was made b'mezid, b'isser on Shabbos, then you're not allowed to carry in there. It's a knas because you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have made that mechitza on Shabbos. You shouldn't have built the eruv on Shabbos. So they did not allow you to carry inside such mechitzas. That's how we pass in Shulchan Aruch. Mishnah Berurah explains b'shogeg it's okay. The Gemara says if the mechitza was made b'shogeg, what's b'shogeg? You forgot that it was Shabbos. You didn't know it was Shabbos, or you forgot, or you didn't know that making this mechitza is asur on Shabbos. It's a knas. It's asur for anybody. Once the mechitza was made, nobody's allowed to use it. Not just the person who made it can use that mechitza. If it was made b'mezid, nobody's allowed to use that mechitza. There is one sort of exception to this. One case you're allowed to make a mechitza on Shabbos, at least in certain cases, if certain technical conditions are met. That is a mechitza of bnei adam, a mechitza made by a human chain, by people forming a mechitza. In certain cases, the Gemara in Eruvin says, in certain cases you're allowed to make such a mechitza. Certain conditions have to be met. Notably, the people can't know that they're being assembled in the form of mechitza. You have to corral them and shepherd them in such a way they won't realize that's why they're being brought here. The Mishnah Berurah explains the reason we're makbid on this is even though that's not a real mechitza. A real mechitza is asur to make on Shabbos, as per our Gemara. But even though that's not a real mechitza, still, if they're aware of what they're doing, if the people who are being brought there know what they're doing, it'll cause a zilzal Shabbos, and then it'll still be asur. But if you can avoid that, then a mechitza b'nei adam is mutter, but a real mechitza you're not allowed to make on Shabbos in any circumstance. Gemara in Daf Shabbos is the beginning of Habona. The Gemara says, if somebody arranges a stone on the ground as part of a building, even without cement, he just arranges it and seats it in a way that it's stable and it's a legitimate form of construction, he's chayav. The Gemara has a kasha. The Brisa says you need tit, you need cement. So the Gemara goes back and forth. The Gemara's maskana is plus a binyane havi. When you build a wall, there are 3 layers of stones: the bottom, the middle, and the top. The bottom one needs to do day. In order to be chayav, you have to arrange it carefully in the ground, and you have to have afra. You have to have some kind of dirt to settle it in properly. Mitzia, the middle stones, they need actual cement. They won't be stable without cement. The ones in the bottom of the ground will be stable without cement. The ones in the middle need cement. The ones on top, Hanacha ba'alma, even just putting the top stones on without any cement or any afar or any tzidud, you're already chayav right there. So the Gemara is telling us two important principles. One is that bona applies even without cement, can apply even without attaching, without cement, as long as you put it there in a way that's normal and stable and a standard form of construction, you'll be chayav, even though you haven't actually attached anything. On the other hand, the flip side of that is binyan has to be, binyan midaraisa at least, has to be in accordance with the proper and standard way of constructing things, and therefore the different stones have different rules depending on what they need to be considered proper building. Rabbi Ribiat, in his 39 Halachos Shabbos, has a number of examples of how you can be chayav bona midaraisa, even though you're not actually attaching or cementing anything. He says if you put bricks on the ground or arrange rocks to border a lawn or a garden, that's bona. Maybe makra patish according to some poskim we said, but that's bona because you're building. There's no cement, there's no anything, but that's how stones are put. When you put stones in a border around your lawn, apparently, you don't use any kind of attachment. You just put them there and they stay. So that's bona. Decorative landscaping materials, marble chips, pine nuggets, he says, around trees and bushes, also bona b'karka. It's a malacha daraisa, he says. If a single stone came out of place and you kick it back into place, that's a malacha of bona on Shabbos, bona midaraisa. All these things, that's the way they're set down, that's the way they're built, and therefore if you do that on Shabbos, that's bona. However, Rabbi Ribiat qualifies, unlike where you actually nail it in or cement it in, which is automatically bona, when you deal with these types of arrangements, loosely connected accessories, or ones that are not connected at all, like in these cases, they're only considered permanent if they're intended to remain for 7 days. If you nail something in, it doesn't matter how long you intend to nail it in. Nailing it in is inherently permanent. But if you just put things down, then there's a criterion that it has to be permanent, which in this context means intended to remain there for more than 7 days. For example, he says, if you put down a large area rug on Shabbos, again, you didn't staple it, you didn't glue it, you didn't nail it down, you just put it down, and you intend it to remain there for more than 7 days, that's bona midaraisa, most of binyan midaraisa. If you intend it to remain for more than 7 days, it becomes part of the house, like the rocks outside, even though they're not attached, that's bona midaraisa. However, he says, it has to be integrated with the structure. If you just put something down in the house, even if you intend it to remain there for a long time, it doesn't really become conceptually part of the structure, that would not be bona. For example, you put down a small floor mat, he says. Even though it might remain there for weeks, he says, a small floor mat doesn't become an integral part of the floor. Similarly, you can put a decorative glass on a mantelpiece, even though it'll remain there for weeks or months, it doesn't become integrated as part of the house. I don't fully understand the distinction. I'm not sure why a large rug is considered integrated and a small rug is not, but that's the basic principle, and these are the examples that he brings. He says, in order to become integrated, he explains further, it has to be batel, it has to become nullified. In order to become nullified, it has to be A, placed there for a long time, which we said before, at least 7 days, and B, it has to be a functional accessory to the structure. So an example he gives is something that's not a functional accessory, he says, would be the example of a large potted plant. Even if you intend it to remain there for months, for years, it doesn't matter. It's not part of the house. It's an accessory of the house, not part of the house. Similarly, he says, many poskim maintain that curtains, tapestries, window shades, pictures on the walls are not considered house fixtures, assuming you don't nail them in it, but they're not considered house fixtures because even though they're intended to remain there for a long time, they're not considered integrated as part of the house in the same sense, apparently, that a large area rug is. Again, I don't fully understand the criterion, or how do we decide what is and what is not, but these are the rules that he gives. On Daf Kuf Gimel, the Gemara talks about charesh, Mishnah talks about charesh. So various acts that improve the ground can be charesh. The Gemara talks about pulling out certain vegetables, ulshin, zradin, if you pull them out, if it's for achila to eat them, then the share is grogeris. Grogeris is the dried fig. That's the share, malachas involved eating things, have to have the quantity of grogeris. If it's for an animal to eat, then it's a different share, malapi agdi. If it's for firewood, then it's the amount it takes to cook a easily cooked egg, a chicken's egg. Imli apas is a karka. If the goal is to improve the ground, then apparently it's charesh, and then it's kolshe. Then even a small amount would be considered, any arbitrarily small amount would be charesh. The Gemara asks, all of them are charesh. Even if your intention is to eat them, you can't deny the fact is that you improve the ground. So why aren't they all charesh? So the Gemara says, you're not machavin, that's not your intention. The Gemara says, so what? But psik reisha, So Rav Shimon agrees. Even though Rav Shimon says Davar Shem Eskaven is not only not chayav, it's mutter on Shabbos, but psik reisha, if it's inevitable, then it's asur, and it even is chayav. So the Gemara says, no, here you're doing it to your friend's property. Your own property, you're happy if it's improved. So that's psik reisha denechale. Your friend's property, you don't care if it's improved. So that is psik reisha delo nechale, so there's no malach of charish. This Gemara is one of the proofs offered by the Aruch, Rabbi Nosson Bala Aruch, for a famous leniency he has, that psik reisha is only asur, according to Rabbi Shimon, if it is psik reisha denechale, psik reisha delo nechale. Not only are you not chayav, it's not a malacha deraisa, it's mutter. It's actually mutter lechatchila. He has a number of proofs. One of them is from this Gemara. The Gemara says that even though it would be a psik reisha, if it's ara dechavre, so it's lo nechale, so it is mutter. Many other Rishonim disagree. Rishonim generally agree that it is asur at least midrabanan, but not midaraisa, but many other Rishonim say it's asur at least midrabanan. Our Gemara, they say, the Gemara never says it's mutter. The Gemara just says that you're not chayav until you hit a gregeres. But asur it is. The Gemara didn't say it was actually mutter. Tosfos explains that our Gemara means that our dechavre is like it's like doing a malacha for a different purpose, not the purpose of the Mishkan. So that's certainly asur l'chatchila, but you're just not chayav for it. So you're not chayav until you hit a gregeres, which is the share for tolish, for kotzer. But of course it's asur midrabanan. So the Aruch said it's mutter, at least in the context of Melechas Shabbos, it's mutter even l'chatchila. Most Rishonim say it's asur, at least midrabanan, albeit not midaraisa. How do we paskin? Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions in the context of handling a plug. If you have rags that are stuffing up the hole, the bung hole, or the hole in a barrel, if you pull out that plug, you're going to squeeze it. That tzchita, you're squeezing out some of the wine, some of the liquid from the rags, from the plug. It's a psik reisha. But if you're not going to use the liquid, if it's just spilling out into the ground, it's holich leibud, psik reisha delo nechale. The Aruch says that's mutter. Other Rishonim say that's asur. Other Rishonim say it's asur, even though it's psik reisha delo nechale, it's still asur l'chatchila. Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions, and the Shulchan Aruch says that the minig was to be mekil, but he says that there were other factors of leniency. The Shulchan Aruch and the other Achronim explain why there were certain additional mitigating factors in this case. So the Achronim point out the Shulchan Aruch is recommending l'chatchila, we don't rely on the Aruch. On the other hand, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Achronim say that it seems that at least when we have other mitigating factors, we rely in part on the Aruch, and that is the general consensus of poskim, that the Aruch is not completely rejected, but we don't rely on l'chatchila, but we do use it as one of several factors in combination with others that will allow the performance of certain acts on Shabbos. There is an opinion they bring from Rav Ben Tzir Meir Chai Uziel, Mishpatei Uziel. He held halachos like the Aruch, but in general the poskim say that we don't rely on the Aruch by itself, l'chatchila. The Gemara talks about the writing of Sefer Torah. So the Gemara says the Shira like Oz Yasher and Hazinu, are written in special ways, not like the rest of the Torah. They have spaces, Ariach al-Gabi Levena, or Levena al-Gabi Levena, Ariach al-Gabi Ariach, different ways of how the spacing is special in the Shira. So the Gemara says, if you write the Shira like a regular part of the Torah, or a regular part of the Torah like the Shira, Harei Yignazu, it needs Geniza, that's not a kosher Sefer Torah. There's a major machlokes achronim. In addition to the basic idea of the Shira, how it's written, there are also, with regard to Hazinu, there are specific rules for exactly how many lines it should have, and exactly which word each of those lines should begin. So, if you write in the general style of the Shira, but you change the number of lines, or you change the words on which lines begin, is that ma'akid b'diavad or not? Is the Sefer Torah apostle? That's machlokes achronim, Rav Shmuel Kluger, and other achronim debate based on language of the Rambam whether the Sefer Torah is apostle or not. This is a question of major practical import because we generally follow the Rambam's rules with regard to writing a Sefer Torah. The Rambam's rules for how to write Hazinu have been the subject of a debate spanning centuries. It has to do with the text of the Rambam. There were different texts of the Rambam. We generally write Sefer Torah, most Ashkenazim, most of the world except the Yemenites, write Sefer Torah based on a tradition that has in the text of the Rambam 70 lines, that the Hazinu has 70 lines, but there are alternate texts of the Rambam that have 67 lines. The Yemenites write that way. Today, based on the Keser Ram Tzova and other sources, today it is almost certain that the correct Gerus in the Rambam is 67. We still write, most of the world still writes Sefer Torah with 70 lines. So if you say that included in this Gemara of writing the Shira incorrectly is writing the wrong number of lines, that would mean that all of our Sifrei Torah are pasul according to the Rambam, which would be a very unfortunate state of affairs. According to the other Achronim, it's only l'chatchila, but the evidence okay. That would be a great relief that our Sifrei Torah would still be valid, even according to what is apparently the correct text of the Rambam, different from our text. On Daf Daled, the beginning of Perek HaKosev, the Mishnah talks about various halachos about the malach of Kosev. Kosev and mochek are inverse malachos. Kosev is writing, mochek is erasing. Generally, any form of writing which is Kosev, erasing that would be mochek. Any form which is not Kosev, erasing it would not be mochek. The Mishnah says writing on your skin, on someone's skin or flesh, is chayev, Kosev midaraisa. Rabbi Ribbayet therefore warns you, do not wash off writing on Shabbos. If you have a stamp, like amusement parks or like camps, where the kids come home with stamps on their hands, you can't wash that off. You don't have to worry about washing your hands from the Netilas Yadayim. Maybe you'll wash it off. It doesn't come off that easily. However, he says, when you dry, you should be careful not to rub off the ink. He says, and if it's impossible to dry your hands without that, you shouldn't dry your hands. You can't erase ink from the skin of a person. The Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah says, if you write with meiperos, fruit juices, different types of dust, anything which is eino miskayim, which is not permanent, pater. Principle is that impermanent writing is pater, and the usual rule applies in Shabbos. When we say the word pater, we mean it's not daraisa, and you're not chayav for it, but it's still aser, at least midrabanan. That's how we paskin. Any kind of writing, even temporary, is aser midrabanan. Rabbi Ribbayet says you can't trace things in frosted window panes or on dusty tabletops. You can't even arrange small particles to make letters. You have a bunch of Cheerios or beads, and you want to arrange them in the shape of a letter to make a T, two perpendicular strokes. You can't do that because that's a form of kosev, even though it's not permanent. That's still midrabanan kosev. You can't decorate a cake with whip topping, even though that's also not permanent writing. It's still also midrabanan. You can't use an Etch-a-Sketch, the systems that move magnetic filings around and they make semi-permanent pictures or words. You can't do that, even though it's not permanent. It's permanent enough to be also midrabanan as a form of kosev. Similarly, with regard to mochek, there is a stringency of the Maram. He talked about a cake that they used to have writing letters on the cake, and they used to eat those cakes. So the Maram says you can't break such a cake. He says that, but this is only poskim say if the letters are a different substance than the cake itself, like frosting or a separate material than the material of the cake itself. If the cake itself is molded into letters or stamped into letters or carved into letters, that's okay. That's not kosev or mochek. That's not mochek at least. So some of the cookies come today with engraved letters on them. That's okay. You're allowed to eat those cookies, but the cookies with letters, but cakes with frosting in the shape of letters is a problem. And some poskim say the Mishnah Berurah brings, the Magen Avraham talks about even pictures. Even pictures is a problem. Picture of a flower on your cake. You can't cut that cake and break the flower. This is a problem in my house. My wife and son like to make cakes or cookies for the parsha with pictures from the parsha, animals or different features from the parsha. So if you shape the cookie using a cookie cutter into that shape, you're allowed to destroy that cookie, break the cookie on Shabbos. But if you do it with frosting on top, that's what we decided not to do. We don't actually draw pictures of animals or frosting, anything too recognizable as a picture on top of the cake, because that could cause problems with cutting the cake on Shabbos. There is an opinion that's lenient. The Rabbi Cheskel Landau in Dagel Meravava says this whole thing, you don't have to be machmer in the first place. He says there are a variety of different reasons to be lenient. Even though it's a psik ratio when you cut it, you don't want to cut it. You're not out to destroy the writing, but it's a psik ratio. But it's psik ratio de lo nechale, which is only midrabanan, and it's mekalkel. It's a destructive act. You're not going to, erasing is only chai if you plan to rewrite something else. You're not going to rewrite anything. And it's shalom nas lichtov. You're not planning on writing anything in its place, which may or may not be the same thing as mekalkel. And it's kilach hayad. It's not the regular way of erasing. And it's only yisur drabanan to begin with. The writing is only yisur drabanan to begin with. Certainly if you eat it with your mouth, you're not even cutting it directly. He is lenient entirely. The Mishnah Berurah says you can be lenient like the Dagel Meravava. If you're doing it with your mouth, you're just eating the cookie or the cake with the frosting, but he seems to recommend that you not cut the cake deliberately if you're going to cut apart the picture or the letters. Later on our Amud, the Gemara brings a statement of Rav Ami. The Gemara says if you write two letters is the minimum share for kosev. If you write two letters, one in Tveria and one in Tzipori, you're chayav, even though they're spatially separated. Mechusar kreva, they have to be brought closer together. That doesn't matter. Since they're two letters, you're chayav, the spatial separation doesn't matter. Based on this, the Taz disagrees with the Lavush, a famous machlokas about whether you're allowed to open and close books that have letters written or stamped, common case today, on the edges of the pages. Library stamps like that sometimes. Other people can stamp that way. The Levush said if you open or close such a book, it's mochik or kosev. It's even worse in the case of eating the cake. He says it's karov ani lomar shechayev lochatas. It's close to being melacha daraisa. By opening the book, you're breaking up those words and letters. That's mochik. By closing the book, you're reconstructing those letters. That's kosev. It's close to being. It's virtually a chiyav chatas. The Taz says that's going way too far. Certainly not a chiyav chatas. The Taz thinks it is okay. And one of the Taz's arguments is that it's like this Gemara of Tvari and Tzipari. The Gemara is talking about a chiyuv, but the Gemara says that two letters that are spatially separated is considered writing. The fact that there's a lot of space between them doesn't matter. Says the Taz, so what does it matter if you open up the books? Now the letters are in two separate places. But the space doesn't matter. The same way it doesn't matter to Mechayev you when you write two separate letters that are spatially separated. That's not called mochik, because the letters, all the letters and all the parts of the letters are still there. They're just separated by some space. And when you close them, you're not creating new letters. You're just bringing the letters back, with parts of the letters back to each other. So the Taz argues that this is not a problem. The Ramah and Tshuva is also lenient. There's another svara that Achronim bring to be lenient. It's like opening and closing the door of a house. We mentioned earlier, building, even Mosif al-Abinyan, is a malacha daraisa. So if you board up a door, you don't want rioters to get inside, so you nail shut the board over the door, that would be bona. But if you close your door and lock it, that's not bona. Why? It might be just as secure. The answer is because anything that's derech tashmisho, that's meant to be open and closed, is not binyan. That's how the house is operated. That's how your kalim, your utensils are operated. That's not bona. So here too, some achronim say, when you open and close a book, that's not kosev and mochik. That's just how the book is used. So that's another reason why it's not mochik and kosev. Despite these arguments, though, the Mishnah Berurah says, Nachon, the right thing to do is ideally one should be stringent and not open and close such a book on Shabbos if you have another book available. If there's another option, it's better to be stringent and avoid this question. Rabbi Ribbiat mentions that some people avoid the question by placing a card between the pages so they break the letters. So even before the book is opened and even after it's closed, they're anyway not letters. By opening and closing, you're not doing anything. Rabbi Ribbiat gets a little skeptical. He says particularly if you can make out enough of the letter on either side of the card, you haven't really done anything. The letter is mostly intact, even if you clipped off a little piece. So if you want to rely on this heter, he says, you have to make sure that the card is placed smack between the letters so that neither part of the letter on either side of the card is visually distinguishable and recognizable as a letter. Moreover, he says if there are multiple lines, like in a library stamp, there could be 3 lines of writing, you have to make sure you put cards through all the different letters. You just break up some letters, there'll still be kosev and mochik on the other letters. So if you want to use this card eitzah to avoid the shaila, make sure that you artfully and carefully put in the card so that all the letters are broken up, and not only that, but that they're broken up in such a way that none of the parts of the letters on either sides of the card will be recognizable and distinguishable as those letters, as the letters that they actually are.